All right, Evan Benton of Dogg for Mayor here to talk about some weird stuff that's going on. But first, pro tip: growing a big bushy beard makes it easier to breathe when you are wearing a mask. Almost as if something like that mattered. Almost as if this were somehow altering the effectiveness of a mask. Uh, but anyway, so if you've been following my channel, you know that I pretty much think that the pandemic is fake. I think it's a hoax. With the possibility for a few judicious releases of certain limited bioweapons or, shall we say, poor policy decisions to goose the numbers, give us a few thousand deaths here and there to make it look real. However, there's always been an interesting phenomenon going on. I do work in healthcare. I do talk to doctors and nurses every day, and they have mentioned some interesting, stuff that I haven't been able to fully ignore in terms of, health effects that might be going on our planet. And a few months ago, I read an article um, that I'm going to read most of today. Well, it's actually a new article because this guy's written, I think, three on basically the same topic. So I'm going to read the most recent one, and that's mostly what this video is going to be about. But briefly, his theory and the theory of a few other scientists is that the effects on our bodies, which some people are currently experiencing, are actually due to what is called space weather. And specifically, what's going on is the Earth's ionosphere is weakening, and that is allowing cosmic radiation, that is radiation from outside the solar system, to uh, get through that ionosphere, which normally protects us, and to affect our bodies in certain ways. And it's very technical to get into how that is happening, but basically it's causing chromosome damage or damage to our DNA, and that may be causing these health effects that some people seem to be seeing. So uh, the ionosphere is a cloud of charged particles that surrounds the Earth, and it normally functions as a kind of shield, and it exists because it is created by the sun coming in and the sun emitting its own form of radiation in the form of these charged particles or ions, and then they are absorbed into the Earth in some way, and then they are spit back and form this ionosphere. And there is a multi-year cycle during which this is weakening, and that we know that because we measure the number of sunspots in a given year, and sunspots are basically a proxy for solar energy output. So when we see fewer sunspots, we know that the sun is putting out less energy, and that is charging the ionosphere less, so the ionosphere is getting weaker. And then within the year, that also fluctuates. I'm going to use, where's my thing? My little, okay. So to illustrate how this works, pretend this is the axis of the Earth, okay? So pretend there's a ball of Earth around this, and this is a line going between the North and South poles, okay? So we know that the axis of the Earth tilts as it goes around the sun in the course of the year, and the particles basically go in through the North Pole and come out the South Pole and kind of circulate like this, okay? So it follows that when either the North Pole or the South Pole are tilted towards the sun, the ionosphere is stronger, and when they're both tilted kind of like this, the ionosphere is going to be at its weakest. Okay, so this, when the North Pole is tilted towards the sun, that's known as the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, and when the when the South Pole is tilted towards the sun, that is known as the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere. And then these are, of course, the equinoxes. And what we saw, of course, with the COVID-19, if I can say that, was we saw a spike in fatalities right around the spring equinox, and again around the fall equinox. So story checks out so far, okay? But the real interesting thing is that this was actually predicted in 2019 by a group of scientists who were studying the uh, phenomenon known as the what is it called, vaping sickness. So people were getting sick from their vapes, their vape pens, and a group of scientists concluded that it's probably because what's happening is the element in the vape pen is getting hot, and the element's made of some kind of iron containing alloy, and it is little bits of it are flaking off in the form of rust or iron oxide, and we're inhaling that in the form of nanoparticles, and then that is basically getting bombarded by this radiation that's coming into us and exciting those little nanoparticles, and that is causing oxidative stress on our bodies. So that's really interesting, and it's really interesting that they figured all that out and that we're not really being told about that every day, because it definitely has an effect on our bodies. But regardless, out of all that, some bright scientists discovered or predicted that we would see some kind of a mass casualty event in March of 2020, and of course we did. So that's my brief recap of what this article is about, and right now I'm just going to get into it and read most of it because it's just really good. And so, of course, before I do that, I have to say this is a theory. We don't know if it's true or not, but the good thing is that in a couple weeks we will. Okay, so we don't have to wait very long to figure this out, whether or not this is true. So that's why I'm making this video now, and I want you all to share it out into the universe and read the article read the article on your own, and be aware that this might be happening, because particularly with the opening up of Texas recently and Mississippi kind of opening up, I am worried that they are setting us up for another wave of these definitely non-communicable deaths to be occurring in the next couple of weeks, and so they can say, "I told you so," and we need to go back to these more and more stringent lockdown measures. That's the worry, that's the concern, and we'll know pretty soon. But here's the article, and we'll get into the science of that a little bit. Alrighty. So coming to us from, I believe it's Mr. Nikita Alexandrov, bachelor's in chemistry and an MBA. So right away, the normie is going to say, wait, he's not a doctor. I'm not going to listen to him, so that's fine. Go away. Adults are talking. So this article, are geophysics dramatically changing COVID-19 outcomes in some locations? We may find out the hard way, March 2021. 2020 has shown us our normal tools for understanding and solving respiratory virus pandemics are just not working for COVID-19 in some aspects of the spread. Mechanisms and fatality make no logical sense. Is it possible that geophysics are coupled to fatality rates and long-term outcomes? The researchers that predicted this pandemic think so. The announcement of a spontaneous peak of deaths peaking in mid-March and following the death pattern of 2020 will be the ultimate validation. There seems to be a lot of counterintuitive aspects of COVID-19 that have researchers scratching their heads, to say the least. Remdesivir, the antiviral drug, which received FDA fast-track approval as the first drug treating COVID-19, was found to be useless for improving COVID-19 fatality, and the World Health Organization almost immediately issued a recommendation against its use. Intubation, the common intervention for respiratory failure, has shockingly low survival rates. 70% or more of patients that have received intubation die on average. And remember, I reported on that in a previous video. This is highly counterintuitive with current understanding, leading many doctors and researchers to speculate that the respiratory failure is actually a bioenergetic issue. Oxygen is not transferring to the blood, almost like altitude sickness or high-altitude pulmonary edema. It's become clear that COVID-19 is not really a pneumonia at all, but some type of complex blood disease causing systematic effects in most organs, somehow without ever leaving behind telltale viral RNA in the locations of damage, like all other viruses. SARS-CoV-2 viral load has been shockingly low, with PCR tests requiring 40-plus PCR cycles to find viral presence, well beyond the unofficial 35 PCR cycle standard Dr. Anthony Fauci mentioned in a recent interview for replication-competent viruses and not just dead nucleotides, period. The epidemiology makes no sense, with the virus spontaneously exploding into widespread disease across the world in the same months, yet seemingly not killing people regardless of distancing measures in entire land masses like India, Africa, Australia, and most of Asia. Yeah. SARS-CoV-2 antibodies found in hundreds of patient blood samples in Italy months before it was identified in Wuhan. Spontaneous and unique lung damage and loss of smell in even mildly symptomatic patients points to a nonlinear and systematic progression of disease. Risk factors for COVID-19 are metabolic disorders like diabetes and obesity, not immune strength, lung function, or other common sense comorbidities, indicating a reliance on the body's bioenergetic system. And he's got to say this: caution, this is speculation and not advice that contradicts any public health measures, blah, blah, blah. Not medical advice. Going back to the basics with the benefit of hindsight, who predicted a 2020 respiratory disease pandemic? Only one group of people predicted this pandemic, those studying the influence of planetary physics on disease outbreaks. In January 2019, as the coronavirus started to take hold in Wuhan, a world-class astrobiologist saw the writing on the wall and published an interview. Coronavirus could turn to global pandemic as freak solar minimum means outbreak imminent. Multiple researchers predicted higher incidences of disease as the sun went into a solar minimum, particularly on the equinoxes when the ionosphere is weakest and Earth is being hit with the highest flux of cosmic radiation and exomaterials. The sun is entering a solar minimum, sunspot activity is dramatically lowering, and the Earth's geomagnetic field is changing, directly impacting the planet and allowing cosmic radiation to penetrate the ionosphere. Interestingly, COVID-19 disease exploded across the world at the exact peak of the March equinox, the exact time correlated to anomalous geophysics during a solar minimum, with smaller peaks globally in the October equinox. Because presumably they figured out how to deal with it. Doctors did, that is. Interestingly, in December 2019, a few months before the pandemic, the sun had 33 solar flare-free days in a row, setting a record in known history and indicating we are in a deep solar minimum. Not only are we in a deep solar minimum, but based on changes of helium presence in this cycle, it appears there are fundamental mechanistic changes happening in the sun. So back here a little bit, the 33 solar flare-free days in a row. How many of you all, like me, knew many people who claimed that they were very, very sick in the fall or winter of 2019 before the coronavirus hit? This would support that this link would be there. All right, here's a nice graph. We're seeing the weakening trend in solar cycles since solar cycle 21, and this is based on counting the number of sunspots in a day, all right? Going back to 1978, if you can't read that, and up to 2020 here. This sounds crazy that the sun could affect disease on Earth, but the influence of cosmic radiation and our connection to the Earth's geomagnetic field is not a new concept. Diseases, particularly viruses, come in yearly cycles, and nobody seems to know why. But each virus seems to have its own very different cycle. A good resource is the Science magazine article, "Why Do Dozens of Diseases Wax and Wane with the Seasons? And Will COVID-19?" So briefly, before I get into the geophysics here, anyone who knows about Antoine Béchamp knows that viruses themselves can't cause diseases. They are merely evidence of some disease process. So that really supports that, this concept, the changes in the fluctuations in the cosmic radiation cause, very interesting and different effects on the body. So we might say that, one kind of radiation signature is responsible for the Epstein-Barr, particles that we're seeing that Béchamp called a microzyme, and another one might be responsible for the flu microzyme that we're seeing. So anyway, continuing on, a famous astrobiologist, Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe, predicted a 2020 pandemic based on geophysics conditions and wrote a paper, is the 2019 novel coronavirus related to a spike of cosmic rays? A detailed paper presented at a NASA conference and hosted by Harvard lays out conditions for a pandemic triggered by solar radiation. A detailed paper reviewing pandemics since 1700 indicates that the disease outbreaks in 1918, 1957, 1968, 2009, and current correspond to solar minimums. So I'm going to share his first article where he goes into a lot more detail about the history behind this stuff. But so 1918 is obviously the Spanish flu. I think 1968 was the Hong Kong flu, and then 2009 would have been the that was H1N1 they called it, H1N1 outbreak. GrandSolarMinimum.com publishes ebooks and information on solar activity and disease, and in 2018 predicted an influenza outbreak in this solar cycle minimum. Well, they were wrong because influenza's gone. A forward-looking preprint published in November 2019 analyzed the mysterious 2019 vaping illness outbreak and connected it to a geophysical mechanism which was correctly predicted to be responsible for a future outbreak in 2020. So there you go. A group of well-respected government astrophysicists and doctors has developed a very detailed statistical model around disease cycles driven by solar pumping, which also explains cyclical outbreaks of COVID-19 and explains why influenzas often have a yearly cycle, but it's offset based on geographical latitude and not climate. Geophysics and virology have made crossroads before, with the spread of disease often correlated to distance from the equator and time of year and not just climate. More than 50% of astronauts experience reactivation of dormant neurotropic viruses like human herpes virus, Epstein-Barr, HSV, CSV, and VSV. Not sure what those all stand for. All known neurotrophic viruses while on shuttle flights or on the International Space Station. It is assumed that immune stressors are the cause of these reactivations. But the same immune stressors on Earth do not create the levels of reactivation seen. It's possible that cosmic radiation or changes in biophysics of the astronauts' bodies are responsible for the reactivation events. Interestingly, reactivation of multiple dormant neurotrophic viruses has been seen in COVID-19 in multiple papers, and anecdotally, many COVID-19 patients have tested positive for Epstein-Barr antibodies. In terms of cosmic radiation, geomagnetics, etc., across the board, these researchers agree that the equinoxes are the time each year where these effects are most relevant and mass casualty events can be expected. One reason is the Russell-McPherron effect. During these times, the ionosphere contains cracks, allowing cosmic radiation and solar wind to become geoeffective, meaning it has an effect on the Earth. The direct changes in the geomagnetics of the Earth are seen during these times, which could potentially interact with biological symptoms directly, as discussed later. This is, I believe this is just showing, well, I'll leave that alone for now. The concept of space weather affecting human health is not new, just not mainstream. Large groups of researchers and hobbyists produce forecasts of space weather events and how they may affect life here on Earth, which can predict days where cosmic radiation, solar winds, and geomagnetic changes may affect health. These groups like SpaceWeatherLive.com and Suspicious Observers have large followings and contain world-class researchers from institutes like NASA. I don't know if that's world-class or world-class. Suspicious Observers is great. Not familiar with Space Weather Live. Another good one is Thunderbolt's project into the whole electric universe kind of thing. I'll put links to those down below in the description. So going on, anomalies in SARS-CoV-2 spread and fatality. The anomalies in SARS-CoV-2 causing the 2020 mass casualty events through traditional contact spreading are seen by looking at places which should have been ravaged by coronavirus, yet are mostly unaffected. Almost all of Asia and Africa. It's like this magic virus just skipped some continents. India is an excellent example. In the commercial slums of Mumbai, almost 6 million residents live in high-density urban housing with unsanitary conditions and are not able to isolate due to poor economic conditions and communal bathrooms. Yet a recent serum survey showed that 60% had antibodies after a coronavirus outbreak, with a reported fatality rate which is less than the flu. This makes no sense in the context of Wuhan's estimated 6% plus fatality rate, which was not seen elsewhere, and no genetic analysis or mutation data has been able to correct for this. So yeah, 6% fatality rate in Wuhan, if that's true, it never happened anywhere else. The only controlled study of COVID-19 infection in public mask wearing shockingly found that wearing a mask did not statistically affect the rates of positive SARS-CoV-2 PCR tests. And I'm just going to skip that. Yeah, so masks don't work is what this is saying. PCR, he's going to get into the PCR test later. All right, this is really, really interesting here. Human challenge experience, okay? It is critical to perform human challenge experiments to see if SARS-CoV-2 human-to-human transmission in a controlled environment correlates to severe COVID-19 disease state. Look these up, okay? Human challenge experiments, when they deliberately try and get somebody sick with a pathogen, they basically never work. It's fascinating. Please, if you can find one, I've talked about this in other videos. They don't do this, okay? They don't do the thing where you cough in someone's face and see if it gets them sick. It just doesn't happen. So that's a big problem for germ theory. The first SARS-CoV-2 human challenge experiments were announced October 20th and will infect 30 to 50, very small group, with increasing doses of SARS-CoV-2 until disease presents. If the bioenergetic theory of COVID-19 is correct, they won't get sick, as I just said. Studies of multiple people quarantining in a household together do not result in a spread of the disease. This meta-analysis of 77,000 participants found that there's only an 18% chance that they would infect someone and 0.7% chance if they're asymptomatic. And then 10 million people this is from Wuhan. China tested their entire population of Wuhan and found that asymptomatic transmission never happened. And of course, this is very strange for the current understanding of a highly infectious and high fatality rate virus that was reported to spread to more than 20 countries almost instantly and cause mass fatality. Okay, so looking at the data, it seems there were environmental effects driving fatality in this pandemic, with graphs of deaths highly coupled across vastly different geographic zones. And then here's an interesting thing. Most people who have what we're calling long COVID apparently got sick during the March equinox. So here's all these graphs, and they're all very highly correlated. You can tell just by looking at them. There's a spike. Sweden, they have a spike in a little bit later than most of the world, right after the equinox, the spring equinox, and then a little bit later in most of the world, right after the fall equinox. Italy was pretty much right on target here. March, later in November. So there's interesting, there's a lag going on in this, if this is true. Oops. All right. It is obvious that there are mass casualty events due to a new COVID-19 disease in 2020, but what if in very particular areas with geomagnetic anomalies there are spikes in deaths? These are questions that need to be asked during such a mysterious pandemic. Excess deaths spiked across the world in areas with dramatically different climates. Populations travel from China all at the same time, as can be seen in the following graphs. So another nice graph. You can look at this on your own if you want to read into it. Basically, he's doing a really good breakdown of how it just makes no sense. The whole thing makes no sense in terms of infectious diseases. But as I have reported extensively, infectious disease as a model makes no sense. Sweden is an interesting control for watching the spread of COVID-19 because they didn't make people wear masks and they didn't shut down things and everything. And basically what this says is that everything happened in Sweden, but just a lot later in the year. So they have much flatter, fewer deaths. This is a really great little animation here, where you can see the disease spreading, or the deaths, shall we say, spreading from the south to the north, as it did in real life. So if this is true, if this happens again this year, we're going to see the same pattern again. Okay, so watch out for that. And as he's going to say later in the article, it's going to start with it's going to start in Italy here. They're probably going to call it like an Italian strain. Um, they're going to blame it on an Italian strain when it's really just this new phenomenon that we haven't really seen before. And of course, Texas, Mississippi, Florida, they're all in the south of the United States. Just like New Orleans was one of the first places to get hit last year. So again, we're going to see in the states, we're going to see it follow the same pattern of spreading from the south to the north, if this is true. So watch out for that and don't be fooled. This is really interesting. They did the same thing here with smart thermometers. So they're measuring, people's temperatures in all of Europe. 1 million, all of the U.S. 1 million smart thermometers, which is kind of creepy that they have those, but good for this kind of instance. There is a so here's what all these smart thermometers look like on March 17th of 2020. As you can see, it started in Florida with some other little isolated pockets, and we're not going to get to see how it progressed after that. But March 17th, pretty much all in Florida, and this is basically, I'm guessing this is going to be like temperatures, right? People running fevers. So what we're seeing, this is a map of fever basically in the United States. And historical data has been removed. I'll just keep going through here. Right, so PCR testing. This is about all I'm going to read for the article. PCR testing, he says exactly what I've said in my videos that I've made. PCR tests don't work. He's going to go here and he's going to quote Carrie Mullis, the inventor. PCR should never be used as a medical diagnostic. So as diligent Dogg from Air fans, you all know all that, so I'm going to skip all that. All right, dry mouth. So yeah, so PCR tests do not work. Still not working. And potential mechanism. This is where it gets really interesting, but I'm not gonna get into this part of it either, because it gets pretty technical for lay people. But basically, right here you go. All of the complex and strange morbidity of COVID-19 could be explained by spontaneous oxidative stress causing single-strand DNA breaks. Okay, so it's damaging our DNA. Long story short, that's what is going on. Okay, and that's about it for this article. You can go on, and I would recommend that you read this on your own. And here's where he's going into showing how the makeup of the bedrock under the earth, how this affects COVID-19. This is super fascinating too, but again, I'm not going to get into it. My first thought when I heard about all this was, well, if this is true, it can't be just affecting humans, right? It must also be affecting animals. So I went and looked up if it were or not, and I found, for starters, this. This is NOAA Fisheries. It's got a little article on something they're calling the 2019 to 2021 gray whale unusual mortality event along the West Coast and Alaska. Okay, so since January 1st, 2019, elevated gray whale strandings, that's washing ashore, have been occurring. This is ongoing, all right? So we're in the middle not only of a mysterious human casualty event, but also a gray whale casualty event, all right? And Forbes, so they're saying 391. Forbes also has an article on it, and they give slightly different numbers, okay? But West Coast whale population drops 25%, which is way more, of course, than the 0.008% that we're talking about with humans and COVID, all right? Starvation may be to blame. So, okay. But they say somewhere in here, so we have, they're saying 378, so a slightly different number, whales washed up dead during 2019 and 2020 winter breeding season compared to an average of 29 a year. So that is a huge change, obviously. And you got to remember we're looking at year-on-year changes with the grand solar minimum, and not so much the equinox effect here, but definitely, you know, there are mass animal deaths. And when I say mass animal deaths, I mean mass animal deaths, okay? This website is called endtimesprophecy.org, great name. And just come here, I will put the link down and just look at all this. This is all of them. Yeah, it's huge. Now, the thing to do with these is to determine whether or not there's actually a spike on the equinoxes. Okay, and I'm not going to take the time to do this. This website goes back to 2012 with this kind of thing. So if you got the time to go through and do this and tabulate it all, please be my guest. That would be very helpful. I did see, so here's September 21st, all right. Interesting thing that we can definitely link is that this was, yes, this was when the mink died, if you remember, killed due to be killed due to coronavirus. So they were actually euthanized. Who knows if they were actually sick or not? Hundreds of cattle dying from mosquito swarms in Louisiana. I missed that. So there's just so many. There's too much to talk about on this page, right? But then I did see when I was just briefly scrolling through this that back in March, we had a lot of what they were calling flu deaths for animals. Let's see if I can find them here. Yeah, 23,000 pigs died or killed due to swine fever. 12,000 quail due to avian flu. 137,000 birds due to avian flu. And that, well, and then there's a salmon farm too. I don't know if that's really, you can really call that related, but at any rate, yeah. So lots of dead animals, a few dead humans. Apologies to anyone included in that number, but you know, again, I'm not going to say there's enough to really, you know, close down the entire world over this. That part of it is definitely trumped up. Sorry, too soon. But you know, there may be something going on, and we'll see that very, very shortly. And so again, just kind of the theory is that you have, if you can imagine back in the caveman days, imagine, you know, the witch doctor learns how to predict eclipses, and then he stands up in front of the whole tribe during an eclipse, and he says, "I will make the sun disappear," and the sun disappears, right? And then he says, "If you do not make me the king, I will never bring the sun back," and he becomes king. And I think that might be something like we're looking at. I think certain people in the world may have learned to predict this kind of mass casualty event, and they decided to leverage it for political gain. And so, as I said in the beginning, the good thing about this theory is it will know very shortly whether it is true or not. And, you know, if it's not, then that's really great because, you know, probably, at least in the United States, these states will follow the trend of places like Texas and Mississippi, right? Because people won't die, and other people will say, well, they opened up and nothing bad happened. And so inevitably we will follow on that path. And I hope that that is the case, but something tells me it won't be the case. So that's why I'm making this video, and I'd really like to hear anybody's comments and any questions that I can answer regarding this theory. I don't fully understand it, but I will dig into it, especially if I get prodded to do so. As I mentioned, I'm going to share this author's other 2 articles on the thing because the website's kind of hard to navigate, and I'll just share the other articles on the mass animal deaths that I also mentioned in conjunction with this crazy thing. So thank you very much for listening to me, and please check all that kind of stuff out on your own. Please tell your friends about this kind of stuff. Tell them to beware of what may be coming, and stay vigilant. Share my video, comment, subscribe to my channel, and have a great day. This has been Evan Benton for Dogg from Air. Thank you and good night.